Always appreciative to come and visit my extended church family at Plainview. I don't know how far back we go, but I've done retreats and activities, and man, I couldn't even begin to. I think one of the retreats I did, I had hair, so it's been a long time ago. I have been at several places throughout the last year and a half. I had 37 events canceled last year. So, speaking events and stuff where folks just said, we're just not going to do that. Some of them canceled and didn't tell me. I called this young man the other night. I was supposed to start a gospel meeting at a church, and I called a guy up and said, hey, just making sure your church services are still at the, yeah. And then 10 o'clock, yeah. What are you going to do about the afternoon? He goes, wait a minute. You plan to be at our church? I said, I plan to be there Sunday through Wednesday. He goes, oh no. And they just completely forgot, which is, we've had lots of disruption. And so I guess the first thing I'd like to start out with is, how do people respond individually and corporately to exigent circumstances? What has been disruptions that have happened? And then have you realized that there are some things that you thought were essential, that were not that essential? That's not a rhetorical question.
I know as far as a lot of companies, they've seriously rethought like how many HR people they actually need.
None. I'll tell you that right now. Zero. Sorry. All right. So yeah, companies, a lot of companies are doing work at home kind of stuff. My wife's driving home from Arkansas, and she says she can't find a restaurant she can eat in. I said, well, they can't find anybody running the counter. I think you'll have several stores that become drive-through only, like it used to be in the old days, because they just can't find people to work the counter. So what effect, has there been disruption in your life?
From a nursing standpoint, it's been other chaos.
Okay, because you've been one of the things that everybody wanted to get to, and there's this many of them and this many of y'all. Okay. And then in crisis, it's we want it now. So your patience has been tested with your patience. See what I did there? What else? How many? Pardon?
I'm on technical support side, so my career has gone from a Monday through Friday job at the office to a 24/7. Always having people work all the time.
And they want it fixed. They want it fixed right now. Okay, so tech support, your value has actually, I'll be asking for a raise.
Reduced by the hour.
Oh, really?
No, I'm saying like lower the hourly rate.
Okay, and so, you've got that. How has it affected us as a fellowship? I think we will lose some congregations. I think congregations close their doors because people will not re-engage, especially congregations with an older demographic. I'm predicting that probably 25% will end up with no Sunday night services. Folks will have said, we kind of got along doing, and I think they'll just, the habit you build is the habit you keep. And we do what we do, and we repeat what we do because what we do is comfortable. We don't like to do things that make us uncomfortable, so we do what's comfortable. I think that will happen. What about you?
Not just the comfortable, but the easy. Do like I can watch worship on my TV, so why do I need to get up and go take a shower and get
Sunday morning at 8:30 with a Pop-Tart? Son, have you not houses to eat and drink in? Roger that. And so, yeah, I think.
I think sometimes, and that's just my opinion, but I think sometimes people use that I don't want to gather excuse because that's what they're hearing and that's what, has become the norm is, we don't need to gather, we need to stay away, and we need to be careful. But that's an excuse to just stay home.
And, I don't think that same crowd is not going to the mall, not going to Walmart, not going to Lowe's, that kind of stuff. There's reasons that sound good, and there's good sound reasoning, and those two aren't friends, okay? They're not even friends on Facebook. Anybody else? What other disruptions? School, yeah. How many of you now wish your teachers got a raise? That the value of what teachers, maybe not what they do, but what they put up with. And you realize that if they were just allowed to teach, it would be a more effective system than we have right now, because teachers have become everything. Teachers and counselors and social workers and therapists and judge, jury, and behavior modification experts and politically correct people and sensitivity and inclusion directors. When it used to be, hey, I'm teaching math. If you want to learn it, you can stay here. If you don't want to learn it, we got stuff you can do. You know, I think after the 8th grade, you either make at least a C or pour concrete. I know when the Quarters owned Alabama Pool, those boys that worked that first summer after school, Alabama Pool went to college. I don't know how many people the pool crew sent to college. Good stuff. So how do Christians respond to unusual circumstances? And there's several things I'd like to do, kind of an intro from Acts 2. Would like to spend some time in Ephesians 4, and then maybe go to Romans 5. That'll kind of be our 3-slot thing. If we don't get to it all, you know, that's the ideal. Depends on how interactive you are and how well we talk. But let's look first at Acts chapter 2. And this is, I don't know, when I got to thinking about this, I thought, what's a good example of the world being one way and then suddenly the world becoming another way, and how did people respond to it? So Acts chapter 2, verse 42. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to everyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Now, if you look at that list, tell me the things that they did. What functional things were they doing?
Got together every day.
Okay, they had daily interaction. All right, what else?
They took care of each other's needs.
Okay, they met needs. What else?
They gladly received the word.
They were open to the word. What else?
Praising God.
They praised God. What else? All right.
Prayed together.
They prayed together. What else? They ate together. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there we eat. That's in the book of Second Opinions, by the way. What else?
They also engaged with people who were outside the church. 47.
Engaged outside the church fellowship. Okay.
It almost sounds kind of the way, tribal, yet inviting. People think, a lot of times tribal groups aren't really open to having other outsiders come in, but they had that mentality of being together and working together and helping each other and all that stuff, but yet they were inviting.
Okay. I'm just going to put that in a bubble by itself. Tribal inviting made them inclusive. I think maybe what we're saying with this and this is that they actually grew. That's interesting. What else?
They had some motivation through that fear and reverence.
Yeah, they had an attitude that what they were doing was important. They had fear, respect, and reverence. And then there was some awe there because they were seeing actual miracles taking place. What you do is important. Why you do it is probably more important. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, you can be an eloquent speaker, but if it's not motivated by love for God and love for people, it doesn't matter. So the why behind the what. The what's super important, but if you do it for the wrong reason, not that impressive. Anything else in this section? They continued. And I like the word steadfast there. It didn't get watered down. It didn't get changed for convenience. It didn't get adopted because it was easier. They did, well, you know, these people have this tradition. The apostles said this. And some of this was absolutely opposite of Jewish practices. They went from Saturday to Sunday. They left the Sabbath and went to the first day of the week. The significance of Passover was overturned. Lots of things where they continued steadfast in the doctrine, or the teaching is what that word really means, of the apostles. Now, how are these special circumstances? Okay, it was different than the world around them. What happens in Acts chapter 1? You have 120 people. When you get to this verse, you have 3,120 people. Does that redefine your norm? Why are they meeting needs and having common goods? Parthians and Medes and Elamites and dwellers in Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, the parts of Libya about Cyrene, strangers from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, showed up for Passover. 50 days after Passover on Pentecost. Pentecost is 50 days after the first Sabbath after Passover. So Passover lands on Tuesday. You wait till the Sabbath. You count 50 days. 7 Sabbaths is 49 days. Pentecost always on a Sunday. 50 days after the Passover weekend when Jesus was crucified, the church grows from 120 to 3,120. And some of these folks didn't go back home. Hey, where are you from? Cappadocia. Where you living? I'm outdoors right now. And all of a sudden, these people who are all Christians have an influx that says, what are we going to do with these people? And how are we going to feed them? And they begin to sell off stuff to buy food for these folks. They begin to sell off stuff so you could afford to have somebody in your house and give them some groceries. And all of a sudden, you've got this influx. And what they did with these, really, this is what was normal. Now it's really abnormal. Now, at some point, what happens to this 8,000 people? Because you get another 5,000 converted in just another chapter. What happens to those people eventually?
Go back home.
They get scattered by persecution. You know, you can look at the biographical outline of Acts, Peter, Paul. Or you look at the geographical outline of Acts. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. Well, if I'm from Cappadocia and I get the gospel, what do you think I need to do with the gospel? Camp out with all you good folks? You know, that's the whole point when Paul talks about speaking in tongues. Hey, if you can speak in tongues, you need a translator. Now, is that the rule or is that a catch-22? You can miraculously speak German. Where should you be? Bam. You don't need for you to stand up in the assembly of the brethren. You know, there's no need for that. You need to go somewhere they can speak it. Now, if what I'm speaking needs a translator, I don't need to be speaking it. But if where I go doesn't need a translator, that's why I've got that gift. Tongues are a sign for the unbeliever, not the believer. Should have never taken place in an assembly. You've got this responsibility. You've got someplace to go. Oh, look, I can speak in tongues. Where do they live that speak that way? Go there. So these folks jumped in, and all of a sudden, because of these exigent circumstances, they had to get involved in all this stuff. Because if I'm living in Jerusalem and my people aren't there, and you're part of the Christian crowd and I don't know you personally, how do you know what I need? Hey, they met daily, probably just checking on folks. Hey, what do you need? What's going on? You got everything you need? Where are you sleeping? Where are you eating? What are your kids' names? You've got all this stuff happening as a response to the unique circumstances they found themselves in. Well, have we found ourselves in unique circumstances? Now, to some people, that circumstances is a gradient. Some people weren't affected by it very much at all. Some people were devastated by it. Some people weren't concerned about it. Infection kind of stuff, and I'm not trying to kick a political football. If I were any less concerned about the virus, I'd be dead. Okay? I think I got it in June, ran a fever, felt like I was walking around about 9,000 feet for about 3 or 4 days. My fever broke. I ran 3 miles the next morning. Now, my dad's 84. I said, Dad, stay inside. He has some lung problems. He has some issues with his respiratory system. I said, Dad, don't go outside. Don't come up here and hunt. I'm in contact with all kinds of people. I've been out of town teaching at 2 different police academies, been with our police academy. Things run through the police academy twice in Huntsville. Got the group last year and got the group this year. I had 5 people in my class Thursday and Friday teaching de-escalation skills. Where'd everybody go? We think we've got COVID. Well, how come you're not being tested? Because you don't get 14 days off automatic. You just lose your time. They'll kick you out of the academy. So we're keeping it on the DL. This is being recorded. I know nothing about it. All right? So you've got these weird circumstances. And some people said, hey, this virus thing scares me. Some people said this virus thing does. Some people said, you can't control me. You can't tell me where I can go and what I can do, and you can't tell me what to wear. And if you tell me I have to do this to be here, I ain't coming back. I've known of 2 churches nearly split over whether or not you're going to wear a mask or not. Oh, wow. So if we disengaged either for discomfort or fear or just because we broke our habits, how do we rebuild what needs to be rebuilt? What did the first century church do? An awful lot of time together. And let me go ahead and church versus worship. Now, I know we use those phrases accommodatively. But what you do in that room over there is worship. What you do out there is church. And confusing worship and church is like confusing the marriage ceremony with being married. Remember being married? Brides in the room, you got to have your way all day. Everything you said happened. Stand there. Wear that. We're going to spend this much money on this. And guess what we all did? I love newlyweds, but I hate to deal with new brides. I finally just started saying, look, I'm your minister. I'm not coming to Thanksgiving dinner. So if you want it done at your wedding, you tell me and it'll happen. And ain't model, get over it. Part of what I bring to every marriage ceremony is my license signing pen and duct tape. And if they've got a bad relative, silence is golden, duct tape is silver. I said, I don't have to, but that's the only day you get to have your way. Once you get married, it's different than the ceremony, right? This is when we gather with brethren. We gather with brothers and sisters, and we praise God, and we're uplifted, we're edified, we're exhorted, and we're taught. We give back to God. That's worship. What we do out here at Walmart and on the arsenal and running heavy equipment or doing tech support, that's being the church. And being the church is different than worship. This is what these people were doing outside of the corporate assembly. This is what being the church looks like. Now, if that's church, is it hard to get the church together? No. Because if that's what the church does, I'm going to be with y'all all the time. If that's what the church's emphasis is, we end up with either people who think that you can be a Ronin Christian. You know what the phrase Ronin means? Okay, a Ronin is a masterless samurai. I study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've got a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I've been a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu student for nearly 25 years. But I haven't been attached to a one gym except the last 7 or 8. Otherwise, I just, wherever Lonnie Beth had volleyball practice, I'd find a jiu-jitsu gym, go work out with them. I've walked into places in Tennessee and didn't know anybody there and walk in and say, can I train? And didn't have a master. You can't be a Ronin Christian. You can't be a Christian at large. But neither is your identity as a Christian just this building. And I see those two extremes are unhealthy. People, I'm just out here floating around doing my thing. And then people whose only identity, I call it the building-centric church. Was this New Testament fellowship building-centric? If so, where was their building? Now, I don't want to start a hot topic, but do you think there are any small groups in this group here? I'm just asking. Where did 3,120 people meet every first day of the week without drawing the Roman soldiers' attention, who are at the Fortress Antonio, which is off the northwest corner of the temple?
It does say in the verse that they met in the temple courts every day.
The temple courts. So they showed up, and the temple courts were this big campus. Now, why did they meet in the temple courts? Probably the biggest public place they could meet and not stop traffic. Can you imagine? Have you ever seen a map of the city of Jerusalem? A little bit. Where are you going to pack 3,000 people? Where are you going to pack 200 people? And so they were showing up at the temple court because it's the biggest open area they could check into. And what were they doing there? Handing out food. Hey, I sold some stuff. You need some money? That was kind of their gathering station, like when we have a disaster relief center and we open up our fellowship hall. So that's what these folks were doing to deal with this sudden circumstance where these people had been displaced, their routines had been disrupted, and some of them would never go back to quote-unquote normal. And this is what the church did to deal with it. Now, if I could sum that up in 3 words, I actually learned this from a corporate psychologist. Attention, belonging, and support. If you're part of a group, a company, a ball team, neighborhood watch, a police force, an auxiliary team, and you receive those 3 things from your parent group, you'll stay connected to that. If you don't receive those 3 things from that group, you will not be connected. If you mature to where you give those 3 things, you'll stay connected. But if you only come as a consumer, you won't stay connected because you want it more and more often. Now, we could probably take attention, belonging, and support and assign one of those concepts to each one of these things, probably multiple. So if we want to be re-engaged, if we want us to come back from having been isolated or insulated and get back and change routines and overcome and rebuild some habits, it starts with a concerted effort to do attention, belonging, and support. And when you read 1 Corinthians 12, the body has the same care one for another. When one member suffers, we all suffer. When one member rejoices, we all rejoice. That's attention, belonging, and support. And so how do we, as a core group, create attention, belonging, and support so that the folks who've chosen not to come back might be motivated to come back? Let's talk about those 3 concepts. What does attention mean?
Recognize they're there.
I'm sorry?
Recognize they're there. Like.
Recognize they're there?
Or missing.
Recognize they're not there. You know, I remember a sad line in a Rambo movie. It's like being invited to a party, not showing up, nobody cares. I know a guy that lives basically in isolation. He's an odd bird. Shows up late, stands in the back, kind of leaves early, doesn't really fit in with any real big crowd. But in about the 6th week of lockdown, somebody said, they're opening the church door and the minister's there and the sound room guys are there. He said, I need to go see some people. He got a letter from his church that only essential personnel should come to the building. He said, well, if I'm not essential, I'll go somewhere else. And he's displaced from his fellowship because they didn't give him the proper attention. How do we give each other attention? Pardon? Phone calls, cards, text messages, Facebook, Instagram. What is it the SWAT guy said? You twit face? You know, YouTube, Twitter and Facebook combined makes you twit face. We use anything like that. How many people have reached out to you during isolation? And how many people have you reached out to? As a youth minister, I ran into a guy named Wayne Baker. Wayne working at a church in Montgomery on staff at Faulkner, and later on was, I think, the president at Bethel. He said, if you're a youth minister, you need to get a Rolodex. A Rolodex is a little thing that has little bitty cards in it. It's like your contact list in your phone. He said, if you got 30 kids, you need to put 30 kids in that Rolodex. And every 30 days, you touch every 30 kids. If your youth group has 60 kids in it, then every 60 days, you touch 60 kids. And it could be a card, it could be a letter, it could be a visit to their school, it could be, hey, we're going to go do so-and-so, would you like to ride with me? And that's what I did with my youth group. I sent birthday cards every month. I invited kids, hey, this is not a youth event, but I'm going to speak somewhere. Anybody who'd like to go can drive with me. And we ran through that Rolodex. For every kid we had, I gave them that kind of contact. What would happen to your fellowship if you just decided, hey, I'm going to take my church directory, and this year I'm going to call everybody in it? I'll send a card to everybody in this church directory. It doesn't have to be they're sick or somebody died. It's just, I'm just going to touch these people. What would happen?
Growth.
Oh, if not growth, it would be at least stronger. I was at a church in Missouri, Bernie, Missouri. Stan Dowk is their preacher. And they forgot that I had to drive 8 hours to get home, so they had me speak on Sunday night as well. So I'm, said, I wish that guy would hush. Wait, I am that guy, so I could quit at any time. But after services, I sat in the back, and as they made their closing announcements, a dude went up to the front and got one of those collection plates and gave it. And as it went by, people were reaching in. I went, I wish I'd have sat closer to the front. They'd taken their church directory and cut it up. Had a name and a phone number. And when it went by, you grabbed a name. And a 7-year-old girl might get the name of a 70-year-old lady. Or a high school kid might get the name of a young professional. And that week, you prayed for that person and you contacted that person. You could call them, you could visit them, you could invite them to dinner. You could say, hey, let's go get a milkshake. But they scrambled their church directory. And every week, you got an assignment for that week. You talk about a strong little fellowship. But it was an amazing concept. And everybody in that room got attention from somebody that was outside their main circle. Now, we stay in those circles because those are the circles we run in. If you have kids at school, you have kids at school, and school dominates your life. If you don't have kids at school, you're free. And you don't think about the poor people who have to sit in car rider lines at 2:30 in the afternoon. You're not controlled by baseball, football, soccer, basketball, and hockey practice. And who plays hockey in Alabama? But we get driven by that kind of stuff. And then because I assume your life is as busy as mine, and you assume I'm too busy to talk to you, nobody talks to me, I don't talk to anybody else. So we give people attention. I know who you are, I know who your kids are, I kind of know what you're interested in. There are people who are naturally good at that. People have to learn that. All human communication is almost adversarial at first. Most of our interaction with folks is like this. What I teach in de-escalation classes is that your communication becomes this. That I can see the world from your perspective. I don't have to agree with it. I don't even have to think it's rational. But I get to let you know I can stand in your shoes. So instead of being interesting, when we have conversations with people, we need to be interested. Hey, what are your kids doing? Hey, how's your wife? Hey, tell me what's going on at your house. If you're good at that, people will talk to you. And when you talk to people and they say, hey, this person gets me, They feel like that they're understood. Most people feel unheard, misunderstood, and rejected. And if we make people feel heard, understood, and accepted, not only do we give them attention, but then they feel like they belong. Let's talk about belonging. Why don't we feel like people belong? Why is it easy to disengage and not come back?
You feel like you don't fit in, or you feel like you're different than the other people.
Okay. And that's a big bucket you just kicked over. When I compare what I know about me with only what I can see about you, that's a terrible way to keep score. Are you guilty of that? Man, they got their act together. They're not nervous. Their marriage is great. Their kids are fine. No, their kids are sociopathic as yours are. Okay? What is the exact clinical difference between mental illness and adolescence? Nobody knows. Okay? If you end up past the age of 27 and we do an autopsy on you and your brain still looks like an adolescent, you have a personality disorder. It's the only thing definitive we can say about adolescence and mental illness. But yeah, we start, I'm different than you. I'm not as valuable as you. I keep score by comparing myself to you. The real problem there is this thing called shame. God built the worlds. And the man and the woman were naked. And there was no shame. Now, as a teenager, that's either creepy or entertaining, right? You got naked people running around, nobody cares. That's not what that verse is about. They were not self-conscious to the point of being uncomfortable. And the minute we become self-aware and become self-conscious, we worry about, am I cool? Do you like me? Am I tall enough, skinny enough, smart enough, athletic enough, whatever enough? When Adam and Eve sinned, let's back up. Did God anticipate sin? Read Ephesians. Before the foundation of the world. Before God made the first Adam, A-D-A-M or A-T-O-M, he said, these people have the capacity to be imperfect. I can fix that. When Adam and Eve sinned, you didn't hear the brakes lock up on creation. It wasn't a big moment. It was planned for. When they do this, I'll fix it. You know what the problem was? When they sinned, shame got introduced. Not guilt, but shame. They hid from each other, and then they hid from God. It's the most powerful tool the devil ever used to ruin God's creation. We hide from each other and we hide from God. The man and the woman were naked and there was no shame. And the first thing that happens when they get introduced to the concept of sin and guilt, they cover themselves. They hide from each other. And then they hide from God. And when God comes into the garden, God says, where are you? Adam says, I'm hiding. Why did you hide? I was afraid. You ever told your kid not to climb up on something? And they do? Oh, somebody just got straight shade thrown at them. Mom went, what happens when you climb up on something? Your little kid climbs up on something and they fall and they skin their knee. What do? And they run to you. God says, hey, don't do this, and when you do it, it's going to hurt. And when they did it and it hurt, instead of running to God, they ran from God. Because I have to run from you, I don't feel like I belong. I'm not as spiritual. I'm not as smart. I don't have my act together. I'm not whatever. And people don't feel like they belong. There's no such thing as second-class Christians. There's no such thing as an elite group. I did an essay based on Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. And it talks about mindsets. And I adopted some of her stuff about academics and athletics and said, that applies to the church. It's 64 pages probably, cognitive spiritual development. It's on Amazon. And it talks about that we come into the church believing we're second-class Christians. I wasn't raised in the church, or my parents divorced, or this person, and all of a sudden we have all these things. Hey, man, I don't really belong. Well, how do you make somebody belong? How do you make somebody feel like they belong?
So that you have commonality.
Oh, look. we have. When you come to my house, guess what you'll figure out? I live just like you live. When you spend time around my kid, guess what you'll figure out? She's imperfect just like yours are. You spend time around me and my wife, you'll find out that we're two imperfect people who are trying to live together. Why do we lose our minds when one of us is imperfect? My wife retired in February. The plan was, after I retire, I'm going to get a little puppy. I'm going to train it to do stuff, and I'm going to do some shows with it. A year ago, they said, you can't come back to school. She said, essentially, I'm retired. Let's go get my dog. So we drove to North Carolina during the zombie apocalypse and got a Spanish water dog named Oreo. Smartest little dog I've ever seen. Super smart. She boots on the ground at our house and gets a piece of laundry and runs. We bribe her to get the laundry back with a hot dog. Guess what? She figured out real quick. Laundry equals hot dogs. The dog can open drawers. We've got a gate at our washroom. She can open the gate. She walk through the house with a sock in her mouth. She doesn't chew it. She just knows a sock equals hot dog. She chews on everything. Now, should I be shocked at that? Why not? That's what puppies do, right? Guess what imperfect people do? They mess up. They insult you. They're rude. They're selfish. They're inconsiderate. They don't think about you. And then all of a sudden we say, well, you're imperfect and I'm not. You don't belong. But what happens if we do these things with each other? We get past our imperfections. Love deals with differences. You know, we think that when people suddenly have differences, that's the end of love. No, when people have differences, that's the occasion for love. So if we're going to be like the early church and we're going to get past these circumstances where it's changed people's routines, we got to change our routine. And this is the routine we change. And we start doing these I've got a rat problem. We do these intentional activities. It changes. Because then what we give people is attention, we give people belonging, and then we give people support. What does support mean?
Help them when they need it.
Help them when they need it.
Find out what they need.
Find out what they need. Encouragement. Sometimes encouragement is not that I'm doing your job for you, but I'm just standing guard to be there if you needed my help. You know, Galatians 6 talks about bearing burdens. It uses two different words for burdens. One's a boulder, one's a backpack. I got a responsibility to you. I don't have a responsibility for you. But there are some things I can't handle on my own. You know, God won't put anything on you that's too great for you to bear. No. God won't tempt you with anything too great, but will provide a way of escape. God allows us to deal with unbearable burdens, so we recognize the need for church. You can get in some life circumstances that you don't have the capacity to deal with. Now, there's never going to be a spiritual circumstance that you don't have the capacity to deal with because God promised a way of escape. No temptation will overtake you that you can't bear. But life circumstances, wow. And those circumstances give us the need for this. It makes church what church is, a body. The church in New Testament is never described as an organization. It's only ever described as an organism. And
sometimes encouragement, when we recognize those times that people need encouraging, sometimes it's too late. I suspect you might see this in your line of business, when you're helping people, with therapy and so forth, that not that they can't be helped, but we need to recognize that encouragement needs to be more of a daily thing with everybody, because just giving encouragement when someone's not necessarily feeling down in the dumps keeps them up there, keeps them, encouraged. Rather than identifying those times where you're going to have to reach out to them because you haven't seen them, they're struggling with something, it's going to be harder to help them out at that time if we kind of take that approach. Yeah,
preventative encouragement rather than interventive encouragement. Because if you wait till somebody's missed 6 or 7 weeks and you call them, then it's a little awkward. And so if we did this intentionally, attention, belonging, and support on a daily basis, or at least a more frequent basis than we do, And our activities as a church weren't just located at how many appearances you made at the building, but we interacted with each other. It'd be really hard for me to get discouraged. It'd be really hard for me to get off the radar and go, well, I don't need those people, and those people don't need me. You know, you may not need me, but I know I need you. We had a guy, and I asked, I said, can I share this story? Yeah. So he calls up one of our elders and said, I've been gone in the pandemic 6 weeks, and nobody's called me from this church. He goes, I work with a group of 25 people at my office, and I had to be off the radar for a couple of days. He says, and everybody in that 25-member group called me, and my coworkers brought food to my house. And he said, and so he wanted to visit with me, and I thought, oh boy. So and he says, the more I thought about it, I realized the people at work contacted me and called me because I'd do something for them. And the church didn't know I was missing because I didn't do anything that y'all missed. He said, that's not an indictment on y'all, that's an indictment on me. And if everybody just understood that, you know why sometimes the church doesn't connect with you? Because you don't connect with the church. Now, if we did this intentionally on a regular basis to just simply say, hey, what's going on with you? And we've got the ability to contact people much easier than we ever have before. And yet we get so wrapped up in other stuff that we just don't. So how do we build habits that we've broken, or how do we establish habits that were never there coming out of this really weird world that we had? Well, I think we look back at the New Testament pattern. Because this is what the church did. This is what the church did in its infancy. And they managed to meet the needs of 3,000 plus people when they didn't have the resources to deal with it. So this is really not about the size of your building or the number of seats on your bus or anything about the size of your church staff. By the way, he was the local pulpit minister in Jerusalem at this time. Everybody ministered to everybody else. And so the first step in doing this is us become intentional about interaction. I'll modify just interaction, recognizing and meeting needs, spending time in the Word. Because if I'm spending time in the Words and you come to me with a spiritual issue, I better have something to tell you. And not give you chicken soup for the soul or anecdotal wisdom. I need to give you open to the Word of God. And then in good times or in bad times, we praise God. I'm displaced from my home, living in a barn in Jerusalem, and yet I've got the ability to praise God. And by the way, what's mine is yours and what yours is mine. Not living in a commune, but what I have belongs to God. My house belongs to God. My lawnmower belongs to God. My pickup truck belongs to God. God doesn't like you to use my bow. I'm just saying that. But everything else I have, God owns. And so why? It doesn't have to be a commune for me to realize that you got some of God's stuff, I got some of God's stuff. We use God's stuff. You know, when Paul talks to Timothy about being rich, he said, don't chase riches. But then in chapter 6, he says, and command those who are rich to be rich in good works, willing to give, able to share. Oh, wow. It's okay to have stuff. Just remember what God gave it to you for. God gave us our riches as tools to use. And then, I can't tell you how powerful intentional prayer is. I mean, when Peter writes, be sober, be vigilant, your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion. I wonder what that verse really meant to him. Because Peter may remember a conversation where Jesus says, the devil is asked to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. You ever had anybody call you out? You ever had anybody be looking for you and you knew you weren't adequate to the challenge? Jesus looks at Peter. Luke 22, Simon, Simon. Jesus always called Peter Petros or Cephas. He jumps into his Jewish name, Simon. If Jackie Jones, that's my wife, ever calls me Lonnie Jones, it's very serious. I have crossed the line. Okay, she's called me Jones or Jonesy all her up, but if she, Lonnie Jones, I have crossed the line. Jesus looks at Peter and says, Simon, Simon, Satan has desired to have you, that he might sift you as wheat. Really, the Greek word there's plural. He's asked for all of you. If you'll leave those apostles alone, I'll show you what they're made of. The devil's a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. You think that verse meant anything to Peter when the Holy Spirit had him write that? Probably re-traumatized him. What was at Jesus' disposal to protect Peter? Jesus know the archangels? I have prayed for you. Of all the things that Jesus could do on a spiritual, cosmic, metaphysical level, of all the resources that were at the hands of the Son of God, you know what the Son of God chose to do for this guy? I prayed for you. Intentional prayer. I really think that in our worship services we should have intentional prayer. But what we typically end up with is free-range praying. And people just kind of get there and wonder, hey, I want you to lead a prayer tonight. I want you to lead a prayer for our elders. I want you to lead a prayer tonight. I want you to lead a prayer for our teenagers. I want you to lead a prayer tonight. I want you to lead a prayer for our government. And pray about that. When you're done, finish. But what do we typically do? We do this free-range stuff. Prayer should be intentional. A lady called me from New York. And I had combined my counseling practice with the experiential education, built a ropes course. And somebody it got on the internet somewhere. A lady called me from New York, said, I looked at what you're doing and I'm interested. So we talked, I bet we talked 40 minutes on the phone, explaining my business model and how I use the therapy and the ropes course and all this. At the end of the conversation, she said, you've been very, very kind to me with your time. And that's fine, okay, I learn stuff from people too. And instead of saying, have a blessed day, she said, and what can I pray for you today? And it caught me so off guard. I said, well, my daughter just left for college. I'm a little worried about her. I don't know this lady. I talked to her on the phone for 40 minutes, and when she said, what can I pray for you today? I told her an intimate secret. You know how powerful it is to walk up to somebody and say, what can I pray for you today? And what my wife does, when she prays for somebody, she texts it, writes it out, and says, this is the prayer I prayed for you today. How many times did Paul write a letter to a church and say, this is my prayer for you? It's one thing to go, hey, man, I'm praying for you. It's another thing to say, hey, I prayed for you to have courage or wisdom or perseverance or, Now, Jackie used to say, I prayed to God that you'd have wisdom in this. That meant, I think you're an idiot. I told God you're an idiot, is what that meant. But telling people, hey, I know what you're struggling with, and this is what I've asked God to do for you. If we prayed intentionally for one another and by name. Now, you can't pray intentionally for me unless you know me, can you? Now, if you don't know me, some of it's your fault, some of it's my fault. Attention, belonging, support. And all these things, they engaged with church fellowship, they engaged with each other, they ate meals together. They had the same attitude about the seriousness about what they were involved in. Church is not a social club. This has eternal consequences, and we've got to stay true to the pattern that's in the New Testament. We can't get out here and be loosey-goosey. We can't compromise on things just because it's not politically correct right now. So the seriousness that we approach, and this is actually called a social multiplier. It's what that tribal inviting thing is. You ever been to a CrossFit gym? What does it feel like? What? Not the CrossFit itself, the gym atmosphere. Yeah, CrossFit is 1940s farming you pay somebody to make you do, which is, Yeah, I feel like you walked into a cult. What about Planet Fitness? What do they say? A judgment-free zone. Come to Planet Fitness, wander around on the treadmill, eat a donut. Nobody cares. You go to a gym and it's like you got to look like us, you got to sound like us, you got to be reps as us, you got to grunt, rah. But there's an aspect that's known as a social multiplier where you guys look like a tight unit and I want to be a part of that, and you invite me to be a part of that. What'll I do? I'll jump on it. I'm afraid sometimes the church has said we're very exclusive and not very inclusive.
One thing related to what we talked about with belonging and support, but also with prayer and this inviting attitude you're talking about. You mentioned that some people, when they approach the church, they view themselves as second-class Christians because they know their struggles, but they're seeing everyone's best face, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we do, and I'm wondering about this for years, and I'm not sure how to resolve it, but I think we do a very bad job of communicating within the church what our deficiencies are. And so everybody is afraid to tell everybody else what their deficiencies are because they're afraid everybody else is going to judge them.
The common denominator behind all sin is selfishness. James 1, James 3:16. Okay? What I'm weak at and what I'm guilty of is irrelevant. My sin is the personal manifestation of selfishness in my life. So, I'm guilty of selfishness. It's going to come out in something. The way mine does is different than yours does. So let's get on the same board. We're all selfish. And because of that selfishness, we do things we shouldn't do. We treat people in ways we shouldn't treat people. So I think you just own up with, we give lip service to the fact that we're all sinners, but we have accepted sins and unaccepted sins. And that's the devil using shame against us. Godly sorrow works repentance that leads to salvation, not to be regretted. And if you do anything and you feel bad about it so that you run from God or run from God's people, the devil's controlling that, not God. Because the mechanism that God set in place was when your heart is touched, you run toward me, not away from me. And I think opening up that discussion is, hey, let's understand nobody's here because we're perfect. We're all here because we're sinners. Why did I come here this morning? I'm a sinner and need a Savior. I need to be reminded of a sacrifice that was made for me, body and blood. And because of that, I'm going to sit beside you in praise. I'm going to listen when the Word is open and try to grow and learn. And I'm going to join my mind with you when we pray. And I'm going to share my money so that we can do some of this stuff. Well, does that make us in any way unequal? And I think it starts in a small group where we go, let's just be real with each other. I don't think you have to tell all your dirty secrets. You've got to know I've got them and you've got them. Okay? Now what are we going to do about them? I'm going to give mine to God. What'd you do with yours? Oh, you did the same thing. Well, then we're on the same level. No second-class citizens. We're there. Now, it's hard to admit that everybody we know is a sinner. Everybody. But that's the truth. And so learning to accept my capacity for imperfection and your capacity. Now, what do I do with that capacity for imperfection? I treat you as if you're forgiven. My wife wakes up with a perfect husband every day because she forgives me, not because I'm perfect. And Lord knows the girl's got a forgiving switch. But so how do we start every one of our relationships over every day? I treat you as if you're forgiven. What would happen to our marriages? What happened to our congregations if that's how we lived? How do you people get along so well? It's almost tribal. We get along with you that well too. And it becomes inclusive. And the church grew. And whether we grow in strength or number, growth is growth. And I think the stronger we get, the more numbers we get. Any questions, comments, wrap-ups?
Ronnie, there's always people who I thought about as a preacher who come to church regularly and, sometimes never miss a service, but they never engage. And I think people coming out of this are going to be in some of that they're going to have trouble. How do you get them to do this, I guess? I mean, all of us here tonight probably see this and want to do this. How do you get the people who never really engage to get involved in that? That's what I struggle with.
Number one, you got to model it. And then number two, and this is the one caveat, is at what level do you have to be engaged to be engaged? Are you a hunter? Yeah. You bow hunt? No, you're not a real hunter. Now, wait a minute. Have you ever killed a deer? Yeah. You're a hunter. Right or wrong? Do you work out? Yeah. What do you do? Cardio? No, I just lift weights. Oh, you don't run marathons. You're not in shape. At what level? See, we've got this thing where we almost you have to look like me and I have to look like you for one of us to be valid. Well, at what level does that look like? How many of the 12 apostles got as much ink as Peter did? Were they unqualified to be apostles? What about all the people who lived in the first century who were Christians whose names aren't in the Bible? How'd you like to be the two ladies in Philippi, Youre and Synecdoche? You got mentioned in the Bible. It was because you're being thumped. Yeah, great. Everybody knows you weren't behaving. I just always thought about that, you know. So sometimes I think we have to go, can you be less proficient at something and still be in my club? I don't know if I answered your question or not. I'm a 58-year-old, 5 foot, 490-pound rock climber. No, you're not. Those things don't go together. Well, yeah, they do, because I still hang a rope on a rock and I still climb. I'm not trying to impress you, and I don't wear spandex. I'm not trying to be on the cover of Climbing Magazine. I like to play with toys on rocks. And I'm still a rock climber. I'm not going to do El Cap, and I hadn't done Half Dome. But I've climbed in 9 states, and I'm a rappel master for a SWAT team. I know my way around a rope. It doesn't have to look like yours to be, because everybody who climbs with a rope, talk to Alex Honnold, he'll say you're not a climber. He's the guy who free soloed El Capitan, 3,000 feet without a rope. Captain Death Wish. Anyway, but at what level, where on that continuum do you say you're not really a Christian? Read Colossians 2. Your identity is Christ. And there's not a criterion other than Christ. Now, if you hadn't been circumcised, if you're not obeying the Sabbath day, you know, the problem with Galatia, and I love to be in the adult auditorium. I don't. Adult auditorium classes are for people who are too lazy to go to Bible class. Okay? And so you sit there and read verse 1. He reads verse 1. What do you think? I think it means what it says. What do you think? I agree with him. Okay, verse 2, you know. And you get into the book of Galatians, you say, what's the problem in Galatia? And some guy raises his hand and says, Judaizing teachers. And that's absolutely scholarly correct. Well, what was a Judaizing teacher teaching? You could marry, divorce, and remarry? Homosexuality was okay? You could gamble, you could lie, you could drink? Well, they were teaching gospel plus one. Oh, you're a Christian. They had taken ceremonial cleanliness and elevated it to righteousness. And Paul said, if you teach any gospel in the gospel we taught you, you're accursed. In fact, if we or an angel adds to this, you're accursed. Well, how many times have we added that layer of righteousness? What translation are you using? You preach wearing a tie? All kind of stuff that the gospel doesn't. And then because of those and I tell this to preachers, you don't raise your children based on your perceptions of the brother's expectations. You get to raise your kids by 2 criteria. Does it please God and does it please me? And if it does, nobody else gets to vote. And that's where they go to college and what they wear and what they play and the music they listen to and the movies they watch. If it doesn't violate God's will and you're okay with it, I don't get to vote on that. But how many times have we seen people judge other people on the way they're raising their kids and make them feel terrible about it? So we get into the idea of what does it have to look like to be involvement? Well, sometimes I'm doing the best I can with what I'm doing. And give people the benefit of the doubt that it doesn't have to be my level, because all of us have 100%. And your 100% looks different than my 100%, doesn't it? Hey, my 100% doesn't look like Paul's. Does yours? So why does my 100% have to look like yours? Or why does yours have to look like mine? Does that make some sense?
It really does. I was just thinking when you were talking about it, I mean, I really like how you just explained that right there. Your 100% and my 100% are not going to be the same. But I think also, you know, it's always been a fact that, you know, 20% of people do 80% of the work, right? I mean, that's just always going to kind of be true. Virus or no virus, you know, shutdown or no shutdown, it's still kind of going to be the same. And I think there always has to be a willing part on the person who's, you know, you're trying to get engaged. there has to be some will coming from them and a desire as well to do something too. Maybe they're shy, maybe they don't know people, maybe this is all new to them and they don't know what to do, so they're not sure, so confused mind does nothing and they do nothing. You know, reaching out is always a good thing, but I don't think it's, you know, you can't walk around having that responsibility of, well, it must be me because they're not doing anything.
Right.
You know.
But reaching out and saying, can I get you engaged at some level? And then they get to decide. Now, if you're not engaged past this level and you're complaining and unhappy, you're doing this.
Yeah.
Let's fix it. But that's when people start blaming the church for their disengagement. If you really want to be a part of something, you're a part of something. There are people who are fans of football teams who haven't won a game and don't like their coach. And they're still unabashed. Okay, so, you know, we choose what we're passionate about even if it doesn't work for us. Okay? And so I think that sometimes we've been too quick to let people who want to make excuses, you know, if anything I say, anything I do, anything I say, anything I don't do can run you away from God, you and God aren't very good friends. Think about when you were dating your wife. You weren't scared of her dad. You should have been, but you weren't. At least when you were dating my daughter, you should have been. Anyway, but those kids didn't care because they're invested in her. So I'm not going to let you run me off from God. Now, if somebody says, I'm not connected, and yet they won't change behavior, then you got to ask, okay, what are you doing, and is it working? And if it's not working, you need to change something. That's adult decisions there. Now, there's a place where we have to bring people along. We have to deal with immaturity. So I can't answer all those caveats. But, you know, you're talking about healthy adult people. Some of these excuses just need to go out the window.
You're talking about what is engagement, right? It calls to mind the parable of the talents. You know, the 5-talent man and the 2-talent man were praised equally for being productive of what they've been given. And if the 1-talent man had been productive, he would have been praised as well. It wasn't really about how much you did. It was about doing what you could.
Yeah, it wasn't about outcomes. It was about performance. And so I think sometimes, though, we tend to do that thing where we judge ourselves against other people. That's not how God keeps score. Okay? Now, if you've been given lots of opportunities, you've got lots of responsibility. If you have limited opportunities, you have limited responsibility. But I think we compare ourselves with other people, and that's not the way Christianity works. All right? So that's installment number 1. So next week we'll look at a model for engagement on a community level, looking at Ephesians chapter 4. And then we'll talk about the process of suffering to hope from Romans chapter 5. Thank you guys for studying this with me. I look forward to hanging out with you guys, and I'll try not to be late next week. Thank y'all.